So, perhaps this is working now. Aha! Very good. Somewhat of a delay. Let's see. Sound off. That's better. Okay. Let me tweet this, see if that works. Okay, let's see how we're going, whether or not this works. Good. Test, test, test. All right, so I just thought I'd try and do a Twitter live as well as YouTube simultaneously, but I do not know if my competence with the technology is just there. So this is certainly a novice trying things out for the first time. I know. So I'm not able to watch anyone just at the moment until I kind of get things together. Right, so I'm just going to talk without notes because, yeah, I've got this new piece of software which is apparently able to put things out to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter simultaneously. How effectively it's doing that, I don't know. If the people in the YouTube can tell me if I'm actually audible, let me know that things are actually being heard, the sound is actually working, then that would be helpful. But otherwise, what we've been doing recently is things that make you go, after I listened to, great, I am coming through, that's good. Fantastic, thank you. After I listened to Sam Harris talk to Max Tegmark, they did two conversations, and it was some years ago as well. And I thought, well, there's so much here. I mean, just the mountain of misconceptions that kept coming at me was phenomenal. I mean, I guess it's in retrospect. Perhaps I heard it when they first had a conversation years ago, and since then I've kind of refined my own ideas about some of this. And so then it becomes jarring. I think I said in one of the podcasts that you hear these ideas, which are the ideas of the mainstream. You know, they're the ideas that the overwhelming majority of people, especially intellectuals out there, have. And sometimes if you're outside of that mainstream and you are more interested in trying to focus on, to be honest, sounds a little bit highfalutin, but more focused upon how to make progress, how to actually solve the problems, rather than being concerned about how the end is nigh. If you're saturating yourself in that worldview and looking at the approaches that could work to solving some of these problems, then when you do encounter people who are saying, look how bad things are and are going to get, and things are going to get worse, you are sometimes woken out of your optimistic slumber. So I've been enjoying sort of going back to hear some of the pessimists. There was a fantastic article. I don't know if people on Twitter saw what I tweeted today, retweeted this article. Just some fellow's blog, actually. It's just some fellow's blog. And he wrote what it would be like if Chomsky, Howard Zinn and Noam Chomsky had have done a live commentary, a sort of a commentary on the Lord of the Rings. Absolutely hilarious stuff. I mean, if I could just read a bit. So as if they are, as if Chomsky is reflecting on the movie as he's watching it, commenting on the movie as he's watching it, and talking about all the ways in which Mordor and Sauron is being hard done by. I just thought that was absolutely fantastic. Like, this person is extremely inventive. When Bilbo Baggins first appears on the screen in Lord of the Rings, Chomsky, of course, this is a fictional thing, right? Of course, Chomsky isn't actually doing this, but this is as if he would have. What would Chomsky say as soon as Baggins appears on the screen? Chomsky says, "And here comes Bilbo Baggins." Now this, to my mind, is where the story begins to reveal its deeper truths. In the books, we learn that Saruman was spying on Gandalf for years, and he wondered why Gandalf was travelling so incessantly to the Shire. As Tolkien later establishes, the Shire's sore foot of pipeweed is one of the major reasons for Gandalf's continued visits. Zin, you refer to conflict as being primarily about pipeweed, do you not? And so it goes on. Chomsky and Zin casting all the forces of good as actually being evil. Gandalf as being a warmonger. Gandalf as being someone who is conspiring to overthrow the innocent orcs and innocent Sauron. And, I just thought that was absolutely brilliant, the way that it was done. So, yeah, on my Twitter, I linked to that article. Well worth reading, well worth reading. But Chomsky's one of these people who is just the absolute, what would we say, king of the pessimists, one of the leaders, the pessimist of pessimists to some extent. I don't know he's particularly scientifically well informed, but in terms of his politics, everything is the fault of the United States. Everything. It doesn't matter what the historical event happens to be. There was somewhere that the United States, or perhaps even Enlightenment values to some extent, are implicated in what's going wrong now, especially when it comes to international relations and that kind of thing. Chomsky, I should say, is a brilliant linguist. One of the things we studied in philosophy was Chomsky's linguistics, which were a brilliantly insightful way of approaching linguistics. I don't know how correct it is, I'm not a linguist or anything like that, but he talked about deep structure and superficial structure. And a lot of that stuff I found to be revealing, but it's just when he steps outside of his own sort of area of expertise, in particular into things like politics and international relations, it's then the pessimism begins. Strangely enough, he actually wrote a book called Optimism, which is precisely the kind of thing one would expect someone who tends to lean in that kind of dystopian Marxist direction to do. To name your book that is absolutely all about pessimism, called it Optimism. In the same way that, obviously the Department of Propaganda in Orwell's books is the Ministry of Truth. It's the same kind of thing going on there. I can see that my sound is, I'm going to be listening to myself and getting echo there. If anyone has any questions on YouTube, I'm happy to answer them. Like I say, this was an experiment just to see if my software works. The only thing I'm not broadcasting on, but which I'm apparently able to, is Facebook. So I'm going to save that for another time. This is something I've seen Euron Brook do to great effect, to simultaneously broadcast to a whole bunch of different streams. So maybe this is something I can try and do. I kind of enjoy doing the live streams because it's not some of effort on my part. So in the recent podcast, I'm going through the M's, and I've done misconceptions, mathematics, the mathematician's misconception. Today was the multiverse. Tomorrow, the next day, I'll get to something like metaphysics. We'll do morality, and I'll just keep on going along on this theme. Minds is going to be an important one as well, where I think that there's just these fundamental misconceptions that crop up, all united by the fact that the people have the wrong epistemology. It is absolutely astonishing that it's the epistemology that does them in. Naval talks about this, about how, if you lack the foundation to some extent, then you're just going to start making mistakes all over the place in an unavoidable way, because you don't have a good method of error correction. And if you have that, this is what epistemology amounts to in the Popperian sense. It's a method of error correction. That's the whole point of it. Alternative epistemologies do not have that at their core. Alternative epistemologies, things like Bayesian epistemology, are about trying to find the truth, or to become more confident in the truth, in the thing that is an actual description of reality. And variations of the justified true belief idea. This is the objectivists, people who talk about objectivism. They have induction at their core, and they won't be moved on it, by the way. They regard Popper as some kind of relativist because they don't understand him as focusing on error correction. David Deutsch emphasizes error correction as well. And if you're not focused on error correction, if instead what you're doing is, or you might think that you're focused on error correction, because isn't it equivalent after all? Isn't it the same sort of thing to just be looking for the truth, looking for knowledge that's justified? No, it's not. It's not the same kind of thing at all. Discarding the falsehoods is not the same as trying to accumulate the truth. Quite a different thing. It's the difference between the bucket theory and the searchlight theory of mind. The bucket theory is, you just put all the facts into your brain, and this is how you learn. And those epistemologies are kind of like that. Let's gather up the truth and fill up our bucket. And the more that we've got in our bucket, the closer we are to the actual truth. When really what we should be doing is we're out there searching. We've got this, and I think the light's a great analogy, because it conjures in the mind this idea of enlightenment, that you can come to greater enlightenment via what method? By error correction. And if you're not focused on that, if that's not at the centre of the way in which you approach knowledge, then you're going to go wrong in all these M ways. The M ways of going wrong in what can mathematics possibly show? Well, the people who don't have the correct epistemology about that think that it's going to get you the absolute, final, pristine truth. The people who don't have the right epistemology think that morality needs to rely upon a firm foundation, the immovable foundation, the solid epistemological bedrock that cannot be moved. And of course, that way leads dogma, that way leads tyranny, that way leads to the religious thinking on these kind of things, where once you think you've got the moral truth, then you're going to defend to the death anyone who might disagree with you. You're going to defend your particular thesis. It doesn't matter what the domain of knowledge is, and this is why I'm concentrating on the M's, you see the mistakes creep in, because you're not focused on error correction. Minds is a really interesting one. The misconceptions about minds not only reveal that people are pursuing the wrong kind of recipe, so to speak, the wrong kind of way in which to make progress on AGI, if that's what they want to do. They're completely misguided, thinking that, well, we need to do is to create more advanced AI, begin to link these narrow AI together. And once you have enough linked together, you have a broad AI. And this is explicitly the kind of thing that Tegmark says. It's what Bostrom says. It's what Harris believes in, that all you need is the tasks that humans are good at, enumerated, programmed, linked together in some way, and you've got general AI, which is wrong. It's a completely misconceived notion of what a person is. A person is not something that is just there to complete tasks, which is what a computer does, or what an AI does. It completes tasks. It follows instructions. It obeys what you tell it to do. And in fact, their concern quite often is that this thing is going to obey to the letter so well what you instruct it to do that it won't deviate from that. So it's not only obedient, it's super obedient in a sense. It'll just obey the first thing that you tell it, and apparently not anything subsequent. So if you tell it, convert stuff into paper clips, then you can't stop it from doing that, or something like that. Well, their ideas, as I've explained in the podcast, are literally incoherent in places, which is why it's so disappointing to read certain philosophers on this and for them not to pick up on this. I guess that everyone is in the nascent stages of trying to understand. That's the most generous thing I can say about this. They're in the nascent stages of trying to understand what this AGI thing is. And so one should expect to be absolutely surrounded by misconception and error. That said, shouldn't you at least try for logical coherency throughout a book that you spend ages on? But Bostrom makes the mistake, Tegmark makes the mistake, and because they make the mistake, Harris makes the mistake because he's getting his material from those guys and similar people who all seem to be talking to themselves and talking to each other and just agreeing on what AGI is. And so they go wrong on the AGI because they're wrong about minds, which leads into the morality, because then they start to say what a person is and to get that wrong, or what a person is capable of doing. They get it wrong on alien intelligence. You know, someone who I admire in all other respects, someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson, thinks the aliens will understand a physics that we will be physically incapable of understanding because their brains will be bigger or something like that, and we'll be physically incapable, which is just an appeal to the supernatural. But on the AGI stuff, he's actually very good. He actually admits where you can just unplug the thing if it starts to go haywire, if it starts to turn bad, turn evil, or something like that. Yeah, anyway. Ashik asks, after David's talk at the Dirac Medal in question and answer, a question is asked, what is physical? Could you share your answer with us? Ah, yes, and David says something like it's asking what is real. The question is kind of asking for a definition, in a sense. You know, what is physical? Like, if you want, well, you know, as someone who follows David Deutsch's worldview, what I would say is can't give you the final answer on that. The best explanation is going to include a certain amount of circularity here. And it won't be revealing for you. If I just say to you that what is physical is what is material, it doesn't help, okay? Because what is material? Well, it's anything that's physical. But I would say that a physical thing is that which can be tested in some way in our world. Mathematical truths are not physical, they're abstract. They can't be, their truth cannot be tested via experiment, but only via proof or computation, independent of what is happening in the physical world. Physical world is made out of atoms, they're physical, but also the forces that mediate the interactions between things like atoms are also physical, but they're not made of atoms. Then you get down to the bosons. Things like, well, how does the electromagnetic force, how do magnetic forces, electrical forces impinge upon matter? Well, that's because of photons. How is a nucleus kept together? Well, that's a physical force keeping the nucleus together. So that's your gluons as the strong force. So all of these things are physical so far. So I'm giving you a list of things that are physical. But then, of course, space and time are physical as well. Space-time is physical. But in what sense? Well, it can't be that they're made out of matter. As far as we know, they're not. They're made out of this fabric, which is space-time. But what is that? Well, it's physical. We can see its effects on things. So all I can say about what is physical is, and this might sound silly, it's like, what is life? If you're a little bit too clever by half, you say, well, life is what biologists study. So physical stuff is what physicists study. But we can't go much deeper than that, except that physical stuff is what features in our best explanations of physics. So it's isomorphic in a way with what we say about what is real or what exists. What exists, and people get very upset about this, people haven't thought through the way in which to answer it, you know. But what exists is what appears in our best explanations of stuff. When you say that something exists, X exists, the birds exist, alien life exists, televisions exist, what you're saying is that there is some explanation of the world, some account of reality that unavoidably invokes that thing. And when you say something exists, what you're saying is, I have an explanation that such and such exists. We can't say alien life exists. All we can say is we don't know if alien life exists. That's an interesting sort of dichotomy there. It may or may not. So the claim aliens exist cannot be made now. That would be a belief that people would have. I would say it's irrational to say so. It's equally irrational to say alien life does not exist. The only rational perspective at the moment, now in the year 2022, modulo someone who really has had an encounter with alien life, I don't think there's such a person, is to say, I don't know that alien life exists. We don't know. We don't know anything in regard to that. But of everything else, you can only say it either exists or it doesn't, given a good explanation. Unicorns don't exist. On what basis can I say that? There is no explanation that requires us to invoke unicorns. The force of gravity does not exist. Why? Because gravity is a consequence of the curvature of space-time. No force is required. And in physics, forces are mediated by bosons, and there is no such graviton. It's postulated in particle physics, but yeah. So that would be my, to some extent, non-answer. What is physical is like asking, to some extent, what is abstract, or what is material. You get down to these sort of base. What is number? The what is question really is kind of definitional, which means it's either going to be circular, or just a vacuous kind of claim. Whatever you regard something as, well, what is physical is material. What is material is physical. Is that circular? Yes. Kind of vacuous as well. You're not learning anything by me just giving you synonyms. All we can say is to give you examples, and from that, interestingly enough, to abstract out the truth. The knowledge of what is physical is an abstraction. So if I tell you fundamental particles are physical, space-time is physical, energy is physical, well, here are examples of physical things. What you abstract out of that is this is the physical stuff. That's what it means for an abstraction to exist, by the way, that you have different instantiations of it. And what is common among them is that really existing thing. Like when we say, in what sense does the number 3 have existence? Well, you can draw 3 dots on the paper. You say that represents 3. The numeral 3, you could put 6 over 2. You could say 10 take away 7. All of these different ways of representing that quantity represent the same quantity. What is that quantity? 3. The abstraction of 3. You abstract out of all of those things that same thing. Tadas, do you have any thoughts on Donald Hoffman and his theories? I've written quite long blog posts. If you go to my website there's Donald Hoffman, the first part, and Donald Hoffman part, the second. He's an interesting character because, well, put it this way, I've mainly focused on his interviews, and those blog posts that I made, which was the first introduction I had to him, was where Sam Harris and his wife Annika interviewed Donald Hoffman. And at first, for about the first part of the interview, half an hour or more, what he said was quite sensible. He was talking, I think, about explanations. If I can remember, he even said something extremely sensible, which is that if his theory of everything, and his theory of everything was that physics is embedded in consciousness somehow, okay, not utterly crazy, I just don't think that it's an experimentally testable claim. He hasn't proposed any predictions that fall out of this. All he keeps on saying, which is kind of a frustrating thing, is that he can make it mathematically precise. That doesn't interest me. You can make up fictional stories that are mathematically precise. That doesn't make them real. I should talk to Tegmark, who says, well, every mathematical structure actually exists in some sense. But you can make up axiomatic systems that contradict each other. So that would mean that your worlds out there, your logical worlds, if they really exist, can strictly contradict one another. Another story. But yeah, Hoffman begins by making quite sensible noises about the process of science, how science works, and indeed, as I was about to say, if his theory is true, if his theory of consciousness is true, mathematically precise theory of consciousness is true, then what should come out of that is the ability to derive the other approximate theories. So things like quantum theory and general relativity, which is exactly right. So he got that right, which is good for a psychologist. In the same way that if general relativity is correct, or a closer to true description of reality, let's say, than what Newtonian gravity is, then one should expect that it will be able to show Newtonian gravity works. Okay, mass approximation, the low velocity approximation that Newtonian mechanics happens to be, comports with relativity, so long as the velocities are low and the masses are low and all that kind of stuff. So this is the history of science, and this is what one should expect, that whatever the successor to quantum theory is going to reveal how quantum theory works and why it works. Now, so Hoffman got that right, that his theory, if it was true, or more true, correct, however you want to say this, the successor theory to general relativity and quantum theory, that all of physical reality is embedded in consciousness in some way, then yeah, it should be consistent with those theories. But I see nothing that suggests there's any experiment that can do this. That theory of Hoffman's, which is this idea that our minds and reality indeed itself is kind of like an operating system. And we're interacting with reality via this operating system. And so what he gets right is that we are minds and we are interpreting reality. I think he just takes it a little too far. Why these people, I've been saying this recently as well, like Tegmark and others, who can be very sensible, but what they're grasping for is the old religious notion that you get to epistemological bedrock. You get to this final complete theory and then you're done. And they all want to find it. Eric Weinstein did the same thing. It's like he's going to, not only is he going to unite general relativity and quantum theory, and I don't understand enough about his theory, I haven't read the thesis, I don't think I could if I tried anyway, but what are the experimentally predictable results of this? How do we test it? The first thing. But the other thing is, they all want to make the claim that this will be the final theory, that this is where progress will stop, that their thing is not merely better than the currently existing theories, but it will be the final word in some way. And they all make this point. Tegmark did, and I think Hoffman did as well, that, well, if we just accept the truth of the fundamental nature of consciousness, the final, foundational fundamental nature of consciousness, then in a sense, physics comes to an end. This will complete physics. Harris always talks this way. You listen to him on his podcast for more than about 10 minutes, and he talks about a completed science of neuroscience or physics, whatever it happens to be. There can be no completed science anywhere. We are just at the beginning of understanding in all directions, whether it be life, chemistry, physics, economics, the nature of personhood, morality, history. We're scratching the surface with these things. We should expect to improve and have ever better theories and more unifications, as well as more simultaneous splitting into a narrower, more focused disciplines as well. All this is going on simultaneously with our knowledge, with our learning. We shouldn't expect it to come to an end. And why people have this desire for it to come to an end, I think, is merely, again, a result of faulty epistemology. And it actually is a faulty epistemology that is inherited from a religious tradition. After all, God has the final, complete truth out there. And so this is why religion didn't really get along with science for so long, early on, the beginnings of science. Because why should human beings think their puny minds can improve upon the divine word of God, the final word of God, the ultimate explanation that's there within the book? It's hubris, isn't it? Well, we know better now. At least some of us do. It's this unusual situation where where the very people who would dismiss religion as mythical nonsense because it's appealing to the supernatural, are the very same people who invoke a final theory that would have no explanation, that knowledge would stop there in some way, shape or form. Why wouldn't it have an explanation? Because it would just be it. Why can't you ask what the explanation for that thing is? Well, you should be able to. If you're not a supernaturalist, if you don't endorse this idea of the final complete truth, then you should expect progress to continue. Alex has asked, what's the difference between a goal and a problem? Isn't a goal just a problem we want to solve? It could be, but the traditional way of thinking about goals is that if you do not achieve your goals, you're a failure in some way. And this is why we make this distinction sometimes. And why indeed the common way of thinking about how to live an inspired life, you go to, you don't have to travel very far on Twitter or Facebook, social media these days. People trying to inspire you, go to the gym, achieve your goals. Go to university, achieve your goals. Sit and meditate for half an hour, achieve your introspection goals. You're supposed to set goals. That's what some people advise life is supposed to be about, this setting of goals, achieving goals, and then at the end, when you have achieved the goal, you feel a sense of accomplishment. The difficulty people have with that, and what I think a Popperian framework challenges with that view, is that we are not failures if we don't achieve our goals. And that achieving a goal can be a coercive kind of a thing. You can think of something better to do before you get to achieving that goal. And that's perfectly fine. If you have a problem-centered approach, then all you're doing is you're moving from problem to problem. Perhaps never finding solutions to them. You're just changing your mind along the way. Is that to say you should just act on a whim all the time and have absolutely zero discipline in any way, shape or form, and not to be self-controlled, all that sort of stuff? No, it's not to say that at all. It's just to say that goals can be good for someone whose life is utterly chaotic. If you're depressed and you don't know what to do with your life, and you're completely at your wit's end about not getting things done, lots of people are in this position of being in a position where they know that things aren't working, but they don't know how to get out of this situation they're in. They're depressed perhaps at not achieving stuff. Things are just generally going wrong. Then I think for that person it can be of some help to set goals and to achieve these things. But the underlying problem is they feel dissatisfaction with life. They don't know what to do next. They have that personal moral problem. Morality is about what to do next. And they might not even have a damn clue about what to do next. So for that kind of a person, may as well set a goal. And then try and achieve it. That at least gives them purpose for a moment. But not everyone is in that position. Some people can be very engaged with life, have a bunch of really interesting things they could be working on. Maybe one of the things is, okay, they want to get a little bit more fit. Maybe one of the things is they want to earn a little bit more money. Maybe one of the things is they want to read more books, they want to learn, they want to achieve better marks, all that kind of stuff. Yes. I wouldn't suggest for that person they should be setting goals for each of these things precisely because these are competing goals. And in trying to achieve one, you're not achieving the other. And you will feel dissatisfied, that sense of dissatisfaction. What we want to avoid, and even the Buddhists agree with this, what you want to avoid to a large extent is dissatisfaction with your life, with other people. Just general feeling of dissatisfaction is not always a great position to be in. You want to be content in your problems. But if you're not achieving goals, you may feel a lack of contentment. Like you have this hunger. Some people thrive on this kind of feeling, so they say. But I think it's a misinterpretation of their own mental state at times. We don't always know our own mental state. So the distinction between goals is A goal is something that tends to be followed more slavishly, that tends to be directed, disciplined, and a thing that people can coerce themselves towards. A problem is something that arises each and every moment for you and can change, and the solution of which reveals more problems, as I like to talk about a lot. The solving of any one problem can reveal a whole family of problem children, as Popper says. But the achievement of a goal is an end point. You have to invent a new goal. But if you have the mindset that it's just problems instead of goals, there is no end point. There is no end point. There's problem, solution, problem, solution, problem, solution. Now, you might say, well, that is goals. Well, you can call it that, fine. But then you're just conflating everything. What do you call the thing of achieving something and then stopping? I don't know. So it's just a different way of a different perspective on what might possibly be a similar situation. We call it the problem situation, and you want to. But everyone has a different problem situation. You're moving from problem situation to, ideally, better problem situations, or you're setting goals and achieving goals. I distinguish between them because one is fun, lacks coercion, is open-ended, and one is closed, requires coercion and discipline and that kind of a thing. And I should say, there are some people out there whose entire business model seems to be about discipline. But I interpret them as not actually talking about discipline in quite the same way. Jocko Willink, I listen to his podcast all the time. Brilliant motivational speaker. Just has a great understanding of human psychology. Truly insightful. Putting aside all of the other great stuff, about how to be a man properly considered, I would say. He talks about discipline. But it's not, you pay attention, and it is not, as you might expect, a military type discipline where you're just obeying because orders have been given, as if it's completely coercive. It's quite the opposite. You listen to how he encourages people and has them solve their problems. He calls it discipline, but I call it finding the fun in something. Identifying the problem, realizing where you are and where you want to get to in order to solve the problem, and what you have to do about getting there. Sometimes I fully admit that there will be people out there who will kind of need to self-coerce if they're stuck, if they've got no other option. If you're there mired in depression and a lack of direction, and you're mentally unhealthy, so to speak, in scare quotes, then if you've tried everything else, why not? Why not try, being disciplined, being goal-oriented for a little while until you get to the next level? It's sort of like empiricism is partway between, you've got people who just believe in the supernatural and God did everything. Okay, that's one level of knowledge, and I'm just going to obey the authorities kind of thing. And then you've got empiricism, which is an improvement, which says you derive knowledge from your senses, but at least it's talking about evidence, that knowledge comes with evidence. But above empiricism, we have this idea of knowledge as conjectural, that evidence is crucial in certain ways, but it's just not the way in which we derive our knowledge. So you have these levels of misconception, right? The lowest, the middle, and where we are with what I would say is Popperian epistemology. So too here with goals and problems. Yeah. You can be a person who is completely lacking in direction. One of my friends used to call himself a rudderless boat. He didn't know what to do after we just came out of high school. It's like he didn't know what to do with his life. He felt like a rudderless boat. Okay, so if you're stuck in that position, you don't know what else to do, and being a problem-centered, solution-focused person is a little bit too abstract for you, then at least better than that, nothing, and hating life might be improved by setting goals. So you're at that level, you're at that middle level. You're effectively the empiricist. But once you've done that for a little while, achieved a few goals and been disciplined for a while, then maybe you'll figure out which of these things that you've been disciplined about, which of these goals you've achieved, is actually the one that you really find fun. And then you won't have to coerce yourself. You won't have to set yourself goals. And I think that's the key point here, is that once you've really figured out what you think is fun about reality, who the people are that you want to spend time with, how you find fulfillment moment to moment, what's the point of goals? You're just doing the thing that is fun and fulfilling and that your life is about. That's where you want to get to. And that is not an unproblematic state. It's a state filled with problems, but with better problems. Even though you have no goals. You're not going, okay, I'm aspiring to that. You're just day to day, this is obviously a luxury that not everyone has, but people can aspire to this kind of thing. Ashik asks, given your answer about the earlier question about what is physical, then is the whole subject of metaphysics simply a mistake? Well, the clever answer to that is, of course, everything's a mistake. If physics is a mistake, mistaken, perhaps a misconception. It's not a mistake to study it at all. I think metaphysics is very important, like mathematics, like morality, the other M's as well. It's just that I think it's also important to recognize when you're doing metaphysics. When metaphysics is metaphysics and it's not science. That there is a distinction to be made there. It's useful to have a metaphysics sometimes. I don't have a preferred metaphysics. What we mean by metaphysics is, or something that is prior to the physics. Some people believe in God. I know physicists who believe in God, who think that's a better explanation for things like the fine-tuning problem. The fine-tuning problem I've talked about recently, there appears to be three ways to go here. Why are the constants of nature the way they are? Why do they have the values that they do? If the charge on a proton was much greater than what it is, then maybe fusion wouldn't occur, and the entire universe after the Big Bang would just be filled with protons, hydrogen nuclei, that would never clump together and form, stars, so you wouldn't have fusion. They'd repel each other. Or if the gravitational constant, the strength of gravity was any stronger, perhaps all the hydrogen that was produced during the Big Bang would have collapsed into a black hole. And there are many of these constants, right? There are many of these constants that are so finely tuned. It's one of the most fascinating areas of physics, is this fine-tuning problem. Luke Barnes on Twitter is, I would say, if he's not the world's greatest expert on this, he's got to be up there. I mean, it's the sheer quantity of material that he's produced on this. He's written a book with Geraint Lewis called A Fortunate Universe, all about precisely this question of fine-tuning. I studied a little bit at university, so I understand the basics. But, the question is, okay, we have this problem. It is a problem. Some people deny it's a problem. You've got Victor Stenger, who wrote a book called The Fine-Tuning Fallacy. Victor Stenger's dead now, but he wrote this book, I think, just before he died. And I managed to go, so I was doing a project at uni at the time specifically on fine-tuning. I got in contact with him. He said, I just happen to be writing this book. And so I got a sort of a preprint of the book, which was great. And his whole argument was it's not a problem, right? Won't go into that now. Most people accept that it's a problem. It does look like a put-up job that the universe has these very finely tuned constants. We're in very much the Goldilocks zone in many ways. Well, one answer is God did it. There's a supernatural God out there somewhere, and he did it. He set all the constants of nature to be just right, so life arises. Okay, that's an easy to vary explanation. After all, which God, Where's God? How did God come into existence? Okay, it just pushes the questions that you would have otherwise about the universe to God. And many people say, well, God has no beginning, God has no explanation, God just is. Well, I could easily say that about the universe. I don't think it helps. But anyway, that's one purported solution. The other purported solution is, well, there's a multiverse where all possible constants of nature are out there somewhere or other. And so we find ourselves in one of the universes, one of the very, very few universes, where the constants of nature are just right. Purported solution. But easy to vary as well. I mean, why couldn't you have all the universes with different physical laws as well? Does it have to be all the different constants of nature are represented out there, or just many of the different constants of nature that are out there? We don't know. This is not, just like God, a testable explanation. There's no experiment we can do to find these other universes, which is why I say I put it in the realm of metaphysics, both of them. And the third explanation I heard, well, whatever the successor to, and I like this one the best, whatever the successor to quantum theory and general relativity is, will be a theory that explains why the constants of nature have the value they do. It will somehow turn out to be mathematically required by the successor theory. Now, I don't know, that sounds more reasonable, but we don't know. Like, how do we test for that? We have to wait until we've got this successor theory, or the successor to the successor theory. My difficulty is that there are scientists out there who have a belief, they profess a belief in one of these things. Well, I don't think that's the right way to go. It's fine to say, well, let's have a metaphysics and see where it goes. So Luke Barnes, for example, actually he's a Christian, but he does the science of exploring the alternative metaphysical hypothesis, namely of the multiverse, of this, all these universes that have different physical constants, I should say, different physical constants. And so you vary the constants, you see what happens. Now, I think that is good metaphysics to do, good mathematics to do. He'd probably be upset and say, no, I'm doing physics. Well, to what extent is that testable here and now? You know, I don't know what the experimental test is that these other universes really do exist in some way, shape, or form. I think but it's important work. I don't know why anyone would get upset about being accused of doing mathematics when they think they're doing physics, or doing metaphysics when they think they're doing physics. One day we might have the capacity to actually test these things. But not yet, not yet. Andy talks about Maslow's hierarchy. Yeah. Yeah. But I think in the West, you know, overall, people are very high up on that, aren't they? Everyone's at self-actualization when it comes to Maslow's hierarchy. And that will continue apace. I mean, everyone almost in the world is either, if they're not at self-actualization, then they're at the point of, you know, certainly deciding what kind of job to take or food to take or house to have, that kind of thing. There's very few people that are right down the bottom. Are observations only useful for criticizing theories? Can they be useful for creating conjectures? For example, by giving a problem. Yes, absolutely. Alex is, yes, you're exactly right. Those are the two things that observations are useful for. The purpose of observation in science is to distinguish between theories already guessed. Now, that simultaneously, if it's not able to do that, it gives you a problem. So when you've got an observation you cannot account for within your current set of theories, then you've got a problem, yes. So it causes you to have conjectures, which is why we do things like astronomy and build bigger telescopes. We're hoping to see the thing that's a problem. As far as we know, we accept that general relativity is our description of gravity, our explanation of gravity. Quantum theory is our explanation of the behavior of matter and energy. So by looking out into space with ever more powerful telescopes, we're not expecting that there's going to be an observation that is going to, as you say, criticize any of those theories because there's no alternative. There's no alternative to general relativity or quantum theory. So even if we see something out there that doesn't seem to fit with that, it doesn't criticize the theory. What it is a problem. It's only a criticism of the theory if we had an alternative. If we actually had two theories and they're competing with each other, then an observation could be a criticism of one. A valid criticism would be a refutation, leading us to choose one, prefer one over the other, as the better explanation of reality. Mike wants to bet with me, Jojo Monster says, that AGI will happen soon. How can we bet in, let's say, 2026? Who has won the bet? Well, absent anything else, the Turing test passed multiple times, I suppose, is what you want, something like that. It's just like saying, well, how do you test that the next newborn baby is actually intelligent? Well, you've got to give it a little while. I would say at birth or before, humans, I'd say long before birth, actually, a human is a conscious thinking creature. They're guessing at reality and they're beginning to explain it. Inexplicitly, they don't have language yet, but they would be guessing at reality, which is what it takes for something to be a human in that way. And so the same rules apply to your AGI. The same rules apply to your AGI. If you suspect something is an AGI, then you better treat it exactly as you treat a baby. You better look after it. You better be careful. You better not imprison it, treat it badly, switch it off, all that sort of stuff. So how do we know? In exactly the same way you'd know that a baby is. That you'd have to have it learn language, and then eventually it will report, could take years, that it's self-aware. Well, self-awareness isn't the criteria, right? But if it begins to say, hey, I've got, subjective experience, not in those words, but I'm hungry, I'm cold, I'm frightened, I'm having fun, all that sort of stuff. They're describing an internal experience, then you're in the presence of a general intelligence, of an explainer of some kind. That's what I would say. Nikhil, how do you see the current phase of civilization and what insights do you find interesting? We are living through the best time ever. It will only continue to get better so long as the forces arrayed against us, which are many, don't win, but they're always in a disadvantage. We are characterized by living through a tradition of criticism. We are still in the Enlightenment. David Deutsch makes this point in the beginning of Infinity. The Enlightenment is often regarded as that historical period back some centuries ago that precipitated things like the Industrial Revolution, this flourishing of science and philosophy. But in fact, it never ended, and the Enlightenment never ended. We're in it, and we're becoming more enlightened over time. The Enlightenment continues apace. So the current phase of civilization is the Enlightenment, but just more. It's a brighter enlightenment and will continue to be a brighter enlightenment every year that goes by, hopefully every day that goes by, and becoming brighter at an increasing rate. Brighter by the measure of being a rational tradition of criticism where reason rather than coercion and violence rules the day. So yeah, that's the phase we're in. Sometimes the difficulty is that this tradition of criticism can misfire. Dawkins talks about how unusual things that happen with biological creatures can be a misfiring in a way. So the capacity of animals to violently defend themselves, that capacity. So in the case of like baboons or something, they can, male baboons have a frightening capacity for violence to protect their family. But that same capacity can sometimes misfire, causing them to kill their own young, misfiring. well, in this, but generally that violent tendency, that strength for the baboon is good for the species, good for the family, and so on and so forth, because it protects the baboons and his family from, lions and other dangerous animals and whatever else. So it's a good thing, but it can misfire. It can be turned in on itself to cause damage. In the same way, a tradition of criticism, this critical capacity that we have, and in particular our civilization has, it can be turned in on itself, it can misfire. And so this is what we get when, you have people saying of the Enlightenment, of the United States, of England, of Australia, that it's just a violent colonial patriarchy that needs to be overthrown, that capitalism is altogether evil, that science is nothing, a history of dead white males trying to control people. All this sort of nonsense is criticism of the good. So it's a result of criticism, which is a good thing, it's a virtue, but turned in the wrong way. Yeah, of course we should be self-critical, but it can be overdone and misdirected. And so that's also a feature of our civilization right now. Now, that can lead to a reaction which can be hyperbolic. So we've got another tension there then, where some people on sort of our side could turn around and say, well, look at things like the trans movement or certain kinds of feminism or so on and so forth. We really need to ramp up our defenses against these people when these are just mistakes. These are just errors. And it's not that bad. Nothing is that bad. Nothing is that bad, despite what social media would have us believe. Okay, I'm going to have to finish up now. We'll finish with Alex. Alex says, an argument that minds and brains are different is that we can simulate a mind on a silicon computer, but how do we know the simulation won't involve explicit representations of biological neurons? Well, we don't know. It could be that. But what I would say is that computational universality says it does not have to be that. That even if that is the first way in which people produce a mind on a silicon computer by physically representing neurons, that it doesn't have to be that way. There must be a way of doing it independent of neurons. There must be a way of doing it otherwise. Jaron Lanier has that. I think a lot of people have had this thought experiment where a future neurosurgery would enable us to do something like, well, take the brain of a person, a regular human, and let's say this is the cure for dementia. What they do is, well, as soon as you lose one neuron to dementia, which seems to be what happens, or in Alzheimer's what happens, replace it with an electronic neuron. Who knows what that looks like? Some sort of little transistor. And then if it happens again, replace that one, and that one, and that one, ad infinitum. And so you can see where I'm going. So that if you replace one neuron, you wouldn't expect anything particularly spectacular to happen. Your brain just operates as normal. Replace another one. But eventually your entire brain it's the ship of Tarsus or whatever his name is, that whole idea of, you replace one plank of wood on the ship, is it the same ship? Well, eventually if you replace all the planks of wood, is it the same ship? Well, the ship is an abstraction. Minds are abstractions. So the physical substrate doesn't matter. The brain might be utterly different, but the mind? Because, put it this way, you could represent the neurons in silicon, but you could also have representations just in software, just in the software, which means that fundamentally the computation is being done by a regular computer made of transistors. So where's the thinking being done? In the software representation of the behavior of the brain or in the physical transistors? Well, I don't know if that question makes any sense until we have a deeper theory of what mind is, I suppose. Cool. Nikhil, I'll end it here, okay? Curious to hear your thoughts on modernism and postmodernism. Yeah, well, I'm a modernist. Postmodernist. A modernist just says that, well, my understanding of it is, I should say, is that a modernist is just someone who endorses the existence of truth, who says there is a truth and we can find some of it sometimes. Some modernists say you can find the final truth. I don't say that. And it believes in things like objective beauty, objective morality, that kind of thing. It's a modernist. And I think modernist artistic movement was about that, trying to generate more beautiful art, for example. And modernist philosophy about being analytical and coming to a rational understanding of reality. And postmodernism rejects all of that, says that there isn't an objective truth. There can't be things that are objectively beautiful or objectively good. I reject that stance. I think postmodernism is bankrupt in that sense and self-refuting anyway. After all, if we reject all truth and that anything can be objectively true, then postmodernism is not objectively true either. And so it refutes itself. That's a lovely way to end it. So on that, until next time, and I'll set it up next time so that I'll actually promote this ahead of time. It seems my little program works for putting things out simultaneously to both Twitter and YouTube. Until next time, bye-bye, people. Thank you for tuning in.